Western technology is good, or even excellent. Without it, Ukraine would certainly have hardly stood in 2022.
Yes! Yes, we shot it down, the bastard!
However, Western technology has a huge downside. There isn't enough of it. Moreover, to transfer a sufficient number of tanks, self-propelled artillery, infantry fighting vehicles and others, political will is needed, which often falters.
Help us accelerate and efficiently speed up the delivery of weapons to Ukraine so that we can liberate the occupied areas. We need powerful offensive weapons, without which this prolonged war only drags on.
All of this can be described with one word: dependency. Therefore, in order to compete with Russia and their astonishingly large amount of cannon fodder and vast equipment, Ukraine really needs the weapons of Ukrainian production. At the very least, it allows us not to ask the West for permission on where we can strike Russian territory. Ukrainian drones are a good example of this. They fly wherever they please. The only question is the distance, and even that seems to be a flexible concept. And what about the front line itself? Ukraine actually has a lot of domestically produced weapons there as well. It's just that not much is said about it. And we will now correct this, at least, with one example, namely the T-64BM Bulat tank. The T-64BM Bulat is Ukraine's main battle tank. Let's not hide the truth, these tanks are indeed not new. As you understand, this modernization of the T-64 is not the ultimate dream. However, this is the model that we inherited the most of after the collapse of the Soviet Union. More than 2,000 units. Moreover, it was manufactured by the Kharkiv Malishev plant. And this, in turn, meant that Ukraine possessed all the production capabilities. But here's the problem. Even at that time, it was considered outdated. The T-64 began production in the 1960s and ended in the late 1980s. But Kyiv got what it got. So the only option was to roll up the sleeves and do a major overhaul of the tank. The designers worked tirelessly and diligently, developed numerous modifications, and in the year 1999 presented these several optimal options. But the T-64BM Bulat itself was presented in 2005. Its improvements were almost identical to one of the modification options, but had their own nuances. We will not stop there. The main thing is what was achieved in the end. The Bulat was equipped with a new 125mm smoothbore gun, as well as 2 machine guns.
The main armament is the 125 meters KBA-3. That's 36 shells. And accordingly, it is also equipped with the KT-7.62 and KT-12.7. This is more advanced weaponry that has increased the firepower of this tank. Therefore, accordingly, and we're talking about, and I emphasize once again, a deep modernization that allows us to say that this tank is already the main serial tank of the Ukrainian Defense Forces.
The developers paid special attention to protection. The tank was equipped with the highly advanced knife dynamic protection system, which in turn saves heavy equipment from armor-piercing sub-caliber shells, cumulative weapons, and highly effective impact cumulative munitions like the impact core.
Here, the principle of operation is that essentially the cumulative jet and the detonation products of the charge destroy the munition into separate fragments and alter its flight trajectory, and the charges are triggered sequentially under the influence of additional underlying charges, thereby increasing the survivability of this armored vehicle additionally.
For understanding, in 2023, 2 Russian kamikaze drones hit the Bulat, and the Ukrainian tank withstood the impact. The dynamic protection knife saved it from a hit to the turret. The second hit was to the engine compartment. However, despite this, the Bulat was able to leave the unsafe zone.
You see? It worked for us.
It worked?
In short, the active protection worked perfectly. It's a real beauty. It tore apart the great metal.
What caused that?
That's from the knife system that's mounted here on the turret. You see, it hit it and it worked as intended, deflecting the entire missile impact. Not even a scratch on the armor.
However, the innovations also played a bad joke. Undoubtedly, they increased efficiency, but at the same time added weight. As a result, the tank had low mobility. Bulat also couldn't even climb a hill with a gradient over 30 degrees. All of this disappointed the crew. But at the time, it seemed that the developers had squeezed the maximum out of the T-64. So other solutions were sought. There were other modifications of the T-64, for example, called Crab, and then the developers began working on the T-64BM. And the future likely lies with the latter.
Bulat started to break down. Due to field wear of the boosted engines. Therefore, the T-64BM2 project emerged. Accordingly, it involved installing an improved engine with a power of about 1,000 horsepower. This made it possible to move away from the 5 TD engines, which had essentially become obsolete. And accordingly, the installation of the new boosted engine improved its combat characteristics, the tank's maneuverability, and the ability, let's say, for direct operation in hazardous climatic conditions, which, well, let's say, called into question the usability of the previous Bulat series.
Be that as it may, it's encouraging that, in particular, the Bulats are fighting on the battlefield. Another good piece of news is that there are many of them. Forbes stated that despite Bulat being Ukraine's main battle tank, over more than 2 years of full-scale war, the tank reserves have remained unchanged. The publication also believes that the Ukrainian military-industrial complex not only managed to endure during the war, but also established capacities for upgrading the machines. Design agreements were also signed with the Czech Republic and Poland. Forbes believes this explains how Ukrainian defenders continue to receive bullets despite their losses. And let's not forget that besides Bulats, there are other modifications that might be somewhat inferior. But the very fact that Ukrainian-made tanks are fighting on the front is a very good sign. A sign that Western equipment is good, but our own is much better. And if you want to know what other equipment is in the Ukrainian arsenal, write about it in the comments. Also, like this video and be sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss new episodes of Arsenal.